So much of what we now think we know about women and men in the past has filtered down to us from this kind of social history. The history always of women struggling heroically against oppressive conditions that supposedly benefited all men. It's a simplified, distorted view of the past that severely compromises our ability to come to fair conclusions about how we got to where we are today. And we desperately need an academic revolution that will provide us with a more accurate perspective.
Right, when it comes to the left, it's not, when we're such idiots, honestly. We were constantly arguing about whether our tax program is more efficient than their tax program. It's not about efficiency. Barack Obama gave the right answer to the wrong question, right? When he was asked in 2008, would you raise the capital gains tax, even if it means less revenue to the government? Would you raise it? He said yes, for purposes of fairness. Right? Even if it meant people were more impoverished, even if it meant people were more poor, the answer was yes, for purposes of fairness. Why? Because people don't speak the language of poverty. People don't speak the language of efficiency. People don't speak Mitt Romney's 57-point tax plan. You can't even name 2 points on his 57-point tax plan. People speak the language of fairness and justice and morality.
Because of the way society's evolved, because of the domination of the liberal left media, people are now nervous about expressing conservative views. Mm-hmm. So they'll say one thing to a pollster, right, and do another thing when it comes to the polling booth.
There is perhaps no subject of study in all of academia today whose takeover by feminist dogma has had more unfortunate consequences than that of history. Feminism has a lot of traction today, largely because we as a society have come to accept that our history has been one of men dominating women. It's the one thing I can rely on all my students to think they know, that up until about 20 years ago, men had all the rights, women none.
Is that the real racists are and always have been folks on the left who wish to exploit racial division in order to pay off their cronies. The reason the education system sucks in the inner city is because the left wants to pay off its union buddies at the expense of black kids. The reason that the left has not done anything for the inner cities despite years of dominance in Detroit, the reason is because they wanted the violence. And it is about intent. It's not about effect.
Even if we could magically get rid of white racism overnight, this would do nothing to increase black test scores, improve black savings rates or black rates of business formation, or strengthen black families or reduce black-on-black crime. Those are the most serious problems facing blacks. Now, for a generation, people have said you cannot point at these problems because to do so is blaming the victim.
Right.
When Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote his report on the black family in the 60s, the illegitimacy rate for blacks was 25%. He said it was a national tragedy, and people said, "You're a racist, stop talking about it." And he did. He hasn't said a word about it since. The illegitimacy rate for blacks in the United States today is close to 70%. So when these problems are ignored, they metastasize, they become far worse. On the other hand, if they are recognized and acknowledged, I'm confident that they can be addressed.
Because nobody on the left knows anything about politics. They know you're evil. That's it. They know you're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe who hates the poor. Right? That's what they know about you. And it's not they think that about you. They know that about you.
Look, there are three possible reasons why groups can differ. The first is genes or genetic differences. The second is culture. And the third is discrimination,
right,
and its
external
institutional
barriers,
legacy.
right.
I reject both the liberal view, which holds that black failure is largely or mainly due to discrimination, and I reject the view that it's genetic. So I focus on cultural differences. And I point out, for example, that in virtually every measure of academic achievement or economic performance, we find not just whites, but immigrants, Cubans, West Indians, Koreans, leapfrogging ahead of American blacks and claiming the fruits of the American dream. I think that this is because blacks have developed a culture that represents an adaptation to historical circumstances, but one that is today in some respects a liability or dysfunctional.
You know, what Trump was offering, just like Brexit, was a kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change a system that has not been benefiting ordinary people.
Socialism is not a good idea that went wrong, and whenever you hear Republicans or conservatives say this, it's because they have the IQ of a kumquat. Socialism was a horribly evil idea that went completely right. It went exactly as they thought it was going to go. This was the design from the start. socialism is a fundamentally immoral, evil, unfair, discriminatory, and disgusting system.
In an earlier video, I talked about the widespread idea that when women won the right to vote in the early 20th century, that all men had been voting for many, many years, which isn't true, but the vast majority of people believe it is. And as a result of that perception, even when some aspect of our current social situation is clearly unjust, as in the cases of preferential hiring, rape shield law, or domestic violence policies, just to name a few, the injustice is considered acceptable, or at least not terrible, because of the idea that it is a corrective to make up for centuries during which women were mistreated and men had it way too good.
As a consequence of, the power of your intellectual argument, you're taking seriously, whether people agree with you or not. Do you worry, however, that some of the arguments that you put forward provide refuge for the true racist? There's some stuff in here that if I was David Duke, I'd be going, ooh, boy, now I've got a really, really good intellectual foundation for my otherwise, creepy and repugnant views.
This is what I call the sleeping with the enemy problem, that there's a sense that you should not make legitimate arguments because illegitimate use may be made of them. I think that the opposite is true, that the public taboos surrounding race, the fact that people cannot speak what's on their mind. When I often speak on campuses, young people will come up to me and they say, well, much of what you say makes sense, but I'm white. I could never say that. I would be hounded off the podium.
Well, you talk about your own ethnic immunity.
That's right.
That by virtue of coming from Bombay, you can say things that a white guy couldn't say.
And I'm trying to use that immunity to widen the parameters of debate in the right tone, because I believe that when these topics are not addressed, then the Dukes and the Farrakhan's of this world are strengthened, because they say, in effect, we are speaking to the secret, suppressed longings of people. The mainstream politicians won't touch the issue. So there's been a racial polarization in which people on the right and on the left have been strengthened by this kind of radicalization. I think that when these issues are aired, are candidly discussed, that the effect will be to come up with more sensible policies.
The vast majority of men never had privilege, but academic historians, the people who should be helping us toward a right understanding, are all too often in thrall to the feminist narrative. As I said earlier, we desperately need a revolution in scholarship that will give us a more accurate picture of women's and men's lives in the past, one that isn't governed by the model of the victimized woman and the privileged man.
Well, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Isn't it funny? When I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing. You're in denial. Just look at the Mediterranean. No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. And you're in denial over Mrs. Merkel's call last year for as many people as possible to cross the Mediterranean into the European Union has led to massive divisions between countries and within countries. But the biggest problem you've got, and the main reason the United Kingdom voted the way that it did, is you have, by stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth to the British or the rest of the peoples of Europe, you have imposed upon them a political union. You've imposed upon them a political union. And when the people in 2005 in the Netherlands and France voted against that political union, when they rejected the Constitution, you simply ignored them and brought the Lisbon Treaty in through the back door. What happened? What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals, they rejected the merchant banks, they rejected big politics, and they said, actually, we want our country back, we want our fishing waters back, we want our borders back, we want to be an independent, self-governing, normal nation, and that is what we have done, and that is what must happen. And in doing so, we now offer a beacon of hope to Democrats across the rest of the European continent. I'll make one prediction this morning. The United Kingdom will not be the last member state to leave the European Union. So the question is, what do we do next? Now, it is up to the British government to invoke Article 50. And I have to say that I don't think we should spend too long in doing it. I totally agree, Mr. Juncker, that the British people have voted. We need to make sure that it happens. But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to how we negotiate a different relationship. Now I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives, or worked in business, or worked in trade, or indeed ever created a job. But listen, just listen.
I'm sorry.
No, you're quite right, Mr. Schultz. UKIP used to protest against the establishment, and now the establishment protests against UKIP. So something has happened here. Let us listen to some simple, pragmatic economics. Between your countries and my country, we do an enormous amount of business in goods and services. That trade is mutually beneficial to both of us. That trade matters. If you were to decide to cut off your noses, to spite your faces, and to reject any idea of a sensible trade deal, the consequences would be far worse for you than it would be for us. And even no deal is better for the United Kingdom than the current rotten deal that we've got. But if we were to move to a position where tariffs were reintroduced on products like motor cars, then hundreds of thousands of German workers would risk losing their jobs. So why don't we just be pragmatic, sensible, grown up, realistic, and let's cut between us a sensible tariff-free deal, and thereafter recognise that the United Kingdom will be your friend, that we will trade with you, we will cooperate with you, we will be your best friends in the world. But do it sensibly, and allow us to go off and pursue our global ambitions and future. Thank you.